They said he was just another useless old man, a homeless drifter standing alone in the park, ignored by everyone who passed. Until one morning, a young woman snapped, turned to him, and shouted loud enough for the whole street to hear, "Why don't you just go die somewhere else?" People looked away. No one said a word. And the old man? He quietly picked up the folded flag that had fallen to the ground and walked off, like someone who'd grown used to being humiliated. But just hours later, the entire street fell silent. A black SUV pulled up. No sirens, no guards. Then, the mayor stepped out, walked straight to the old man, and said just two words, "I'm sorry. Welcome to Endless Stories, where the forgotten hold stories that make cities bow their heads. If you believe respect should never come too late, and honor is never outdated, hit follow and keep these stories alive, one voice at a time." He stood in the same spot every morning, right next to the faded bench near the fountain in Jefferson Park. A man in his late 70s, wearing a worn military-style jacket, boots that had clearly seen better days, and holding in his hand something people rarely noticed. A neatly folded American flag, yellowed at the edges, pressed flat from years of being carried and protected. He didn't speak. He didn't beg. He didn't even look at people passing by. He simply stood there, still, quiet, present, but not demanding presence. To some, he was just another homeless man blending into the background of the city's noise. Some looked past him. Others deliberately avoided eye contact, quickening their pace. A few teenagers once laughed as they took a picture with him blurred in the background. No one stopped. No one asked. Until one Tuesday, at precisely 11:47 a.m., a young woman with a toddler in one arm and a shopping bag in the other was walking by when she abruptly stopped. She furrowed her brows in disgust, stepped aside sharply, and muttered something under her breath. Then, clearly irritated that he hadn't moved, she turned and snapped. "Why don't you just go die somewhere else, old man?" she shouted, loud enough for half the park to hear. It hit the space like a gunshot, shocking, sudden, and sharp. The mother stormed off without waiting for a response. People nearby glanced awkwardly, exchanged looks, then quickly pretended to be busy on their phones. The moment passed, and no one said a word. But the old man didn't flinch. He didn't react. He didn't even blink. He slowly looked down, realizing that the force of her voice had startled him enough to drop the flag. With careful hands, he bent over, picked it up from the pavement, brushed off the dirt, and folded it again, with an elegance and precision that didn't match the condition of his clothes. Then he walked away, not angry, not ashamed, just like someone who had lived through much worse and learned to carry that weight alone. What no one noticed, however, was a boy, maybe 11, standing on the other side of the fountain. He had paused his bike ride, had his phone out, and recorded the entire moment. Not for TikTok, not to go viral. He didn't even know why. Maybe it was something in the old man's silence, or maybe the way nobody else cared. That night, the boy uploaded the video with no caption, no hashtags, just raw footage, 17 seconds long. In it, one cruel sentence, one silent response, and one folded flag. By morning, it had been shared over 80,000 times. The city's main Facebook page was flooded with comments. Local news picked it up within hours. Some people were furious. Some were ashamed. Some recognized the man. Others just wanted to know, who is he? Why does he come here every day? By late afternoon, the sound of tires pressing onto gravel echoed through the park. A large black SUV with no visible markings pulled up quietly near the fountain. No sirens, no media, no guards. Just one woman stepping out, dressed in a white button-up, hair tied back, wearing a small city seal on her collar. She didn't speak to the reporters who had just arrived. She didn't wave at the onlookers who had started gathering across the street. She walked straight to the bench, sat down, and waited. It was the mayor, and she came alone. The mayor didn't check her phone. She didn't bring a statement. She didn't even sit like a public figure used to attention. She sat like someone who had just realized they were too late. For a while, she waited in silence. A light breeze rustled through the park trees. A mother passed by and pulled her child a little closer, whispering something. A jogger slowed to a walk, took out his earbuds, and just stared. Across the street, a small crowd had started to gather, most of them quiet, unsure what they were witnessing. She sat alone for 12 minutes. Then, from the far end of the sidewalk, he appeared again. The old man. Same jacket, same boots, same flag. He didn't walk with purpose or urgency, just that same measured pace, like a soldier walking into the memory of something too heavy to speak aloud. He didn't seem surprised to see her. He didn't ask why she was there, and she didn't stand up. She waited until he reached the bench, then quietly gestured to the empty spot beside her. He looked down at the seat. For a long second, it was unclear whether he would sit. And then he did. They sat together, not facing each other, not speaking, just looking straight ahead. The mayor folded her hands in her lap. "I saw the video," she said finally, her voice low, "and I saw your name." He didn't answer. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a printed photo. She handed it to him without a word. It was black and white, old, worn at the corners. In it were 10 young men in uniform, smiling, standing in front of a cargo plane. One of them was unmistakably him. Younger, upright, eyes burning with purpose. He held the photo for a moment. His hand didn't shake. "I lost 8 of them," he said quietly. "One came home, but only part of him." She looked down. Her voice almost cracked. "You should have never been treated that way. Not here. Not in this city." He nodded slightly. It wasn't the first time. Just the loudest. That silence returned, but it felt different now. Not heavy. Not awkward. Just present. She turned to him again. "I came here to say something, but I realized words aren't enough. So I'll start with this." She stood up, turned toward him, and in front of the cameras, the joggers, the onlookers, and the silence, the mayor of the city bowed her head, not as a politician, as a citizen. And he, for the first time in the 2 years since he'd stood in that park, looked someone in the eyes and nodded back. Long before the video went viral, before the mayor bowed her head, before headlines called him the silent veteran, there was the flag. People passed him every day, barely noticing his face, rarely meeting his eyes, but always, without fail, they saw the flag. Not flapping proudly on a pole, not displayed in glass, but folded tightly, held close to his chest like a heartbeat. Always the same way, same creases, same corners tucked in, same devotion. He didn't protect it from the weather with plastic or cloth. He didn't shield it from rain. He simply carried it, as if rain had no power over what it meant. After the mayor's public apology, local journalists tried to piece together who he was. Records were old, incomplete. His name led to more questions than answers. But one person, a volunteer city clerk named Emma, whose father had served in the Marines, noticed something others overlooked. "The flag," she whispered one morning while reviewing photos. "It's always the same one, same folds, same fabric, same wear." Later that day, she went to the park. No press, no fanfare. She brought 2 coffees, one for herself, one for him, and simply sat on the far end of his bench. She didn't ask for permission. She just waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15. He didn't speak, but he didn't ask her to leave either. Then finally, his voice broke the silence. "Lo, even that flag," he said, still staring ahead, "belonged to a 19-year-old kid named Caleb Henderson." She blinked. "Was he your son?" He shook his head gently. "Worse. He was mine in uniform." Then came the story, not rehearsed, not dramatic, just lived. Caleb had joined straight out of high school. Small-town boy, no real plan, just a heart full of ideals. "He couldn't shoot straight to save his life," the old man said, a faint trace of humor slipping in. "But he could run faster than all of us, and he never once questioned why we were out there. He just believed we had to protect something." He paused, then added, "Turns out he protected me." On a scorching morning in Kandahar, when things went sideways, a sniper caught them off guard. The shot was meant for the captain, But Caleb didn't think, he reacted. He moved, and he never got back up. The old man went home with guilt and medals. Caleb went home in silence, with a flag folded by military hands. 2 weeks after the funeral, Caleb's mother showed up at his doorstep. She didn't blame him. She didn't even cry. She just stood there, handed him the folded flag and said, "I made them give it to me, but it doesn't belong in my drawer. You're the only one who knows what it cost." He never let it out of his sight again. That flag had been to 5 funerals of other boys from his squad. It had been held during every speech he refused to give. It had gone with him when he drove cross-country, looking for the homes of soldiers long buried in forgotten cemeteries. It had been rained on, slept on, bled on, but never washed, never replaced, because in every crease was a name, in every worn edge, a voice, and in the silence he carried was everything he wished he had said to the ones who never came back. He didn't bring the flag to be seen. He brought it because it was the last part of them he still had. And no one, not time, not weather, not cruel words shouted in public, could ever take that from him. For years, no one had heard him speak. Vendors thought he was mute. Children thought he was just a statue that moved. Even the local cops referred to him on their radios as flagman, no threat, just still. But silence, in his case, wasn't absence. It was protection. It was protest. And it started with a name. Not long after the mayor's public apology, reporters tried to dig up his identity. They ran facial recognition, searched veteran records, even sent someone to follow him home. He walked 3 miles that night to a rundown trailer outside city limits. But when they knocked the next morning, he was already gone. It was Emma, the volunteer clerk, who found the clue no one else noticed. In a box of unprocessed paperwork at the city archives, misfiled under community disputes, she found a letter, dated almost 2 decades ago, signed by Colonel Samuel J. Everett. The handwriting was tight, precise. At the bottom, a military ID number barely legible from faded ink. But it was him. The letter was never published. It wasn't even responded to. It was a request, a simple human plea, asking for the city to reconsider the demolition of a small memorial park near a housing project. It had once been a training ground, a place where a young squad prepped every morning before deployment, where Caleb had tripped on a root and laughed so loud they all joined in, where the captain, Sam Everett, had told them, "Come back here, all of you. When this is over, we come back here." The city ignored the letter. They bulldozed the park the following month. No ceremony, no warning, just gone. That's when he stopped speaking. Not because he had nothing to say, but because no one had listened when it mattered most. He left the city. For almost 10 years, he lived off back roads, attended strangers' funerals, planted flags in empty fields. Sometimes people thought he was just another drifter. Sometimes they tried to arrest him for loitering, but he never argued. He never yelled. He just moved on, flag in hand, eyes straight ahead. It was only when the new mayor took office, a woman who'd lost her brother in Iraq, that something shifted. One Veterans Day, she saw him at a ceremony, off to the side, alone. She didn't approach him then, but she remembered the face. A year later, when the video went viral, she didn't need advisors to tell her what to do. She recognized the uniform, and she remembered that silence. He hadn't vanished. He'd just gone quiet because the noise had failed him. But now people were asking again, not just for a name but for a story, for meaning, and maybe for forgiveness. That week, someone taped a paper sign to the park bench where he always stood. It was written in crayon by a child who had seen the video online. It said, "You don't have to talk. We hear you now." He stood a little straighter that day, and for the first time in years he looked up, not at the sky but at the people again. His name was Lucas, 11 years old, skinny, quiet, liked building Lego tanks and rewatching old war documentaries with his grandfather, who called every commercial government fluff. Lucas wasn't popular. He wasn't the kind of kid who raised his hand in class or led group projects. But he was observant, always had been, and when he saw something wrong, Something in him clenched, like the world had missed a beat and someone had to notice it before it disappeared. That morning, when Lucas biked past the park, he didn't plan to stop. He wasn't trying to be brave or smart. He didn't even know why he paused at first. He just saw the man again, standing in the exact same spot as the week before. Same jacket, same folded flag. Something about that posture, so still, so heavy, made Lucas slow down. And then it happened. The woman, the shout, the cruelty. Lucas didn't even think. He pulled out his phone and hit record. Not because he knew it was important, but because his stomach dropped, and he knew that if he didn't, no one would believe what it felt like to hear someone talk like that to someone who never said a word. The clip was only 17 seconds long. He didn't post it with a caption. He didn't even tell his parents. He just uploaded it. And within 24 hours, everything changed. His school called an emergency assembly. His classmates stared at him differently. Some whispered about the viral kid. Some asked if he did it on purpose. One even told him, "You just wanted attention." Lucas wasn't sure how to answer, because the truth was he didn't know why he did it. Not really. He just knew he couldn't be the kind of person who walked away. A few days later, he returned to the park. He didn't bring a phone this time. No camera. Just a peanut butter sandwich wrapped in foil, and the folded note his grandpa told him to give, if it ever felt right. He waited until the man looked at him. Lucas walked up, handed him the sandwich and the note, and said, "You don't have to say anything. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry for what she said, and I think you're someone important." The man looked at him, long and steady. Then he opened the note. It read, "You stood for us. We forgot how to stand back. But my grandson remembered. From an old soldier who still salutes you, sir." The man didn't speak, but this time he smiled. Samuel J. Everett was once a man with a voice that could command an entire base into silence. A decorated colonel, a leader of men, the kind of officer who didn't need to shout because when he spoke, everyone listened. Until the day they didn't. It was 10 years ago when it all changed. Not in a firefight, not on foreign soil, but in a windowless government building with fluorescent lights and too many smiling faces. Colonel Everett had returned home after his final deployment. A mission that ended in what the media called an operational success. But for him, it ended in a body count. 5 soldiers gone. One of them Caleb, the youngest, the loudest, the one who called him old man and made everyone laugh on hard days. After months of silence, Everett did what men like him rarely do. He spoke up. He requested a public inquiry into the flawed intel that had cost those lives. He wrote reports, attended hearings, gave testimony behind closed doors. But somewhere between the halls of power and the ink of official records, his words vanished. The mission was closed, the documents sealed, and the men forgotten. So Everett stopped using words. He retired early, sold everything, moved to a trailer outside city limits. And once a year, on the exact date of the ambush, he walked back into town and stood in silence, holding the one thing they didn't take from him, Caleb's flag. The first year, no one noticed. The second year, someone called the cops. By the third year, they'd learned to ignore him the same way the system had. But every year, without fail, he returned. Same hour, same spot, same silence. Not because he wanted attention, but because the only thing louder than injustice is a man who refuses to forget. He never asked for a plaque, never demanded tribute. He just stood there, because to him, standing was the only thing left he could do for the ones who never made it home. And for 10 years, no one really asked why. Until a boy with a camera broke the cycle. Until a mayor remembered what leadership should look like. Until a city began to realize that honoring the fallen starts with listening to the ones still standing. That year, on the eve of his quiet vigil, someone left a single candle by his usual spot, unlit, but waiting. The next morning, when Everett returned to the bench, he found the candle lit, and 20 more standing beside it. Not from reporters, not from politicians, but from people, ordinary people, who had finally learned what it meant to be present without needing to speak. And as Everett stood holding that worn flag, He knew he wasn't standing alone anymore. The morning was colder than usual. A sharp wind swept through Jefferson Park, turning the fallen leaves into whispers at his boots. Colonel Everett arrived just before sunrise, same as always. Same bench, same folded flag pressed tight against his chest. But this time, something was different. His steps were slower, his breath shorter. The rhythm of his walk was off, like a man whose bones had finally admitted the years he'd refused to count. The local coffee vendor, who had quietly learned to set an extra cup on the far edge of her cart every November 6th, noticed it first. Everett paused longer before sitting. When he did, he didn't place the flag on his lap like usual. He kept both hands around it, holding it as if it might slip away if he let go. The hours passed. People came by. Some left small notes. Others lit candles. A group of local veterans stood silently across the path, saluting every hour on the hour. No one interrupted him. No one asked anything. Until mid-afternoon, when a gust of wind cut harder than usual, and Everett leaned forward too far. His right leg buckled. In one sharp, terrifying motion, the colonel dropped to one knee. Not in tribute, but in collapse. His hands instinctively reached for balance, and for the first time in a decade, the flag fell from his grip. It tumbled toward the ground, just inches from touching the dirt. But before it could land, a hand caught it. Small, young, steady. Lucas, the boy with the camera. He hadn't spoken, hadn't even made a sound. He had just been there, seated under the tree nearby, watching, waiting. And when the moment came, he moved without thinking. He held the flag with both hands, looked up at Everett with eyes full of something far older than 11, and whispered, "I've got it." The old man froze for a second, breathing heavy, face pale. Then slowly, he reached out and took the flag back. Not with embarrassment, but with gratitude. He looked the boy in the eyes and said only one word, "Thank you." It was the first time he'd ever said it in public. The crowd had gathered. Some applauded gently, some wiped tears. The coffee vendor set a second cup next to his usual one, this time with a napkin folded neatly beneath it, as if the moment itself needed support. Everett stood again, not as steady, but taller somehow, and beside him Lucas stood too. That day, for the first time, the vigil wasn't a one-man ritual. It became a bond. Between generations. Between memory and motion. Between a man who had carried too much for too long, and a boy learning what it meant to carry something with him. There was a letter, folded 4 times, yellowed at the edges, tucked into a hidden pocket sewn into the inside lining of Colonel Everett's jacket. It had traveled with him through every vigil, every state line, every quiet night alone in the trailer just outside city limits. But no one had ever seen it. Not until now. After the incident at the park, when Everett nearly collapsed and Lucas caught the flag, the boy came by the next day with something simple. A small envelope. Blank. Empty. Just something to say, "If you ever want to write something down, I'll mail it for you." The colonel smiled, then reached into his coat, pulled out a much older envelope, and handed it over. "Don't mail it," he said softly. "Just read it." Lucas took the letter home. His hands trembled as he unfolded it, careful not to tear the fragile creases. It was addressed, simply, "To the son I never got to know." The letter was not long, but every word felt like a weight dropped into still water. "I don't know if this will ever reach you. I don't even know if you'd want it to, but I needed to say it, even if only to the silence. You were born while I was overseas. Your mother sent me a photo in a plastic sleeve. You were screaming, red-faced, full of life. I carried that photo in my vest every day. I missed your first steps, your first words, your first anything. I told myself I'd make it up to you. I believed I would. But then came the letter. Not the one I'm writing now, the one that said you died. Hit by a drunk driver. 6 years old. They wouldn't let me come home. The mission couldn't be delayed. The casket arrived before I did. So here I am, still standing, still holding this flag, still folding this letter and unfolding it when I need to remind myself that love doesn't stop just because life does. Lucas read it again, and again, and again. The next morning, he returned to the park, but Everett wasn't there. For the first time in years, the bench sat empty, just a folded flag placed in the center. And beneath it, a note in Everett's handwriting. Gone to visit my boy. I'll be back by sundown. Lucas sat there and waited, guarding the flag the way Everett once had. And when the sun dipped below the trees, the old man returned. No words were exchanged, just a look, a nod. And for the first time, Colonel Everett sat down and let someone else hold the flag while he rested. November 6th came again, the 12th year since Colonel Everett began his silent vigil. And this time he wasn't alone. Not because a mayor showed up or a boy held a flag, but because the town had finally noticed. The coffee vendor arrived an hour earlier than usual, placing not 1 but 20 cups on the cart, free for anyone who came to stand. The librarian closed early, wheeled out a small table, and set up a display titled Letters from War, Words We Never Sent. She included a sealed envelope, unmarked, so people could write something to anyone they forgot to thank. The high school band didn't ask for permission. They just walked to the park, one by one. No uniforms, no formation, and at 10 a.m. began to play taps. Not loudly, but soft, like a lullaby wrapped in wind. Local veterans came in full dress. They stood in silent rows behind Everett, some saluting, some holding old flags, some just crying quietly with hands clasped. And at the center of it all, Everett stood, a little slower to rise, yes, but still straight-backed, still steady. Lucas beside him, holding the flag with both hands like it was something sacred, because it was. By noon, hundreds had gathered, not to perform, not to film, just to witness. The mayor didn't speak this time. Instead, she placed her speech, handwritten, on the bench and walked away. Then something happened that Colonel Everett never expected. One by one, people stepped forward and stood next to him, beside Lucas, behind the veterans, children, teachers, janitors, nurses, mechanics, a mailman still in uniform, a teenager with headphones still in his ears. People who didn't know each other, didn't plan this, hadn't rehearsed, but felt the same pull in their chest. It's time we stop letting him stand alone. Everett's hands trembled for a moment. Not from age, not from cold, from something else. A kind of release, a kind of relief. For 12 years, he had stood as a symbol of what was forgotten. But on that day, he stood not in spite of the town, he stood with it. As the sun began to dip behind the trees, someone lit the first candle. Then another. Then another. By nightfall, the bench where he once stood in silence was surrounded by hundreds of tiny flames, like stars that refused to disappear. And finally, as the last note of taps echoed into silence, Colonel Everett sat down. Lucas placed the flag back in his lap. The town didn't clap. No speeches, no headlines. They simply stayed. And in that stillness, Everett realized something he hadn't felt in years. He was home. Spring came slow that year. The wind was gentler, the air softer, and Jefferson Park, once just another stop in the town's routine, had become something more, something sacred. Colonel Everett hadn't missed a single November 6th in over a decade. Until now. That morning, the bench was empty. No boots, no flag, no still figure casting a silent shadow across the fountain. Just the faint sound of birds and the quiet questions in people's eyes as they arrived. One by one, cups of coffee in hand, candles in their pockets. Lucas came early, earlier than usual. Something had told him today would be different. He sat on the bench and waited. At 9:17 a.m., a black sedan pulled up. No flags, no escorts, just one man in a crisp blue uniform, an army officer, holding a small wooden box, and walking with the careful grace of someone who knew how to carry weight. Lucas stood up. The crowd grew quiet. The officer didn't speak. He simply walked to the bench, placed the box on it, and opened the lid. Inside, the flag, folded perfectly, pressed with precision, and beside it, a note. To those who stood beside me when I could no longer stand alone, this is not goodbye. This is my last salute. I carried this flag not for myself, but for the ones who couldn't come home. Now I leave it with you. Don't let it gather dust. Don't let it be decoration. Let it stand. Let it remind. Let it mean something. SJE. Lucas didn't cry right away. He placed both hands on the box. Then, slowly, he picked up the flag, turned toward the gathering crowd, and for the first time he was the one holding it up. Someone began humming. Then came the soft sound of boots stepping in unison. Veterans lining up. Children holding candles. The mayor standing silently, hand over her heart. And then, a boy stood where a soldier once stood. A community stood where silence once was. And a folded flag, now lifted again, wasn't the end of a life, but the beginning of something that refused to be forgotten. The last fold wasn't closure. It was a promise that some things, some people will never be left standing alone again. Thank you for staying with us until the very end. This wasn't just a story about a flag, a soldier, or a boy with a camera. It was a story about gratitude, about silent sacrifice, and about the power of a community that chooses to remember instead of turning away. If you believe respect should never arrive too late, if you believe those who once stood for us deserve someone to stand for them, then help us keep these stories alive. Hit that follow button here on Endless Stories. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you have a story no one ever told, let us help you tell it. One story can bring a city to silence, but when we tell it together, the world starts listening.